In this project, we're going to learn 5 new skills: running stitch, back stitch, satin stitch, applique, and French knots. For this project, you will need some fabric, a needle, some scissors, a pencil, felt, embroidery thread in 3 different colours, and an embroidery hoop. An embroidery hoop is optional though. In this video, I go into quite a lot of depth into topics such as how to thread a needle and what an embroidery hoop is for. But if you feel more advanced than this, then please find in the description below that I've added some time slots to skills that we're going to be covering for the embroidery stitches and for the applique. So this is an embroidery hoop. Embroidery hoops aren't essential for you to use, but they can make your life a lot easier when you are doing embroidery. The point of an embroidery hoop is to keep your fabric nice and tight while you're using it, and it's one less thing to think about as you are sewing if your fabric is automatically going to stay tight and not have creases in it. So what an embroidery hoop does, I get my piece of fabric, an embroidery hoop will keep your fabric nice and tight as you are sewing with it. If you don't have an embroidery hoop, when you are doing your little stitches and things, if you pull too hard with your thread, your fabric will naturally crease. So the embroidery hoop, by keeping your fabric as what we call a drum-like tension, keeping it nice and tight, it will prevent that crease from happening. So I'll show you how to put a piece of fabric onto your embroidery hoop. They come in 2 parts. You might need to loosen the top to release the centre section. Put the centre piece down on your table. Put your fabric on top of that. Slot your embroidery hoop on, and you can tighten or loosen it at the top. So I'm going to make it a little bit tighter. And I'm also, you can see it's, you can see if I poke through it, my fingers will show through. If I pull it a little bit tighter to get that drum-like tension that we were talking about, then you can't really see my fingers as well. So just make sure the top's nice and tight as well, and then tighten your embroidery hoop. Okay, so to start with, we're going to need your fabric and a pencil. I'm going to start by drawing my initials at the bottom of the fabric. These initials need to be big enough that you're going to be able to follow them with a running stitch, but small enough that you can fit a tree over the top of them. Okay, so I've got my initials drawn very, very lightly in pencil there. You can use tailor's chalk if you've got tailor's chalk as well. That's probably better. The next step is we are going to draw the tree trunk. So please don't draw a really tall tree trunk. This is only going to be a little tree trunk, because the bigger your tree trunk is, the longer it's going to take you to finish this exercise. Okay, so we want this to be a nice quick exercise so that we can learn the techniques covered here, and then we can use those techniques in our own designs later. So here's the base of my tree trunk. I've made it slightly wider at the bottom than it is at the top, and I've also got some space for a little tree top, which we will cut out of felt and add as applique, and we're going to add some little French knots onto the top of that as well. Okay, so now we're going to follow our initials using a running stitch. So I'm going to get some thread. I've got some nice red thread here, and I'm going to thread my needle. So the needle has a very, very small hole, which we call the eye of the needle, and I'm just going to hold my thread really, really close to the end of the thread. I'm not sure if you can see that, and I am going to thread the needle like that. There are things called needle threaders that can help you to thread your needle if you are struggling, but practice makes perfect with this, and you know, sometimes it might take you a few minutes to get threaded, but hopefully with practice you'll get faster and faster. Okay, with the end of the thread I always tie a knot in the end. So to tie a knot, I make it into like a little sort of fish shape, like that. There's a little fish, and then we put the needle through that bit. Should create a knot at the end, and you just pull until you get a knot like that. and this knot will stop your thread from coming all the way through the fabric and undoing your lovely work. So as I sew, I hold on to the needle here, because if I pull, it's not going to come unthreaded. If I was holding on to my needle here, you can see it's going to start to come unthreaded. So always as you are sewing, hold the eye of the needle. That's the best place to hold. Okay, to do a running stitch, you are going to come up through the fabric. You're going to go forwards a little bit and down through the fabric. There's your first stitch. You're going to come forward through the fabric. As you can see, there is a little gap there, and you're going to go forward again. I think of the running stitch a little bit like a dolphin moving through the ocean. It's always going forward and it's going up and down through the water surface. Okay, try to keep your stitches an even distance apart and an even size, and try and follow those curves. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going with this and you can watch the process. Okay, when you come to the end of the letter, you want to make sure that you knot your thread on the back. So I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to create a little loop, a bit like a fish again, and then I'm going to bring my needle up through that loop. Okay, now to control where this knot forms, I like to put my needle into the loop. I point it towards where I want the knot to form, and I pull on that bit of thread like that. That's how I create knots exactly where I want them every time. Okay, and I'm going to cut this bit of thread. I'm going to cut that bit of thread too. Don't cut your knots off though. If you cut your knots off, then your work's going to come undone again. Okay, so I'm going to tie another little knot. Sometimes I make a knot like that by wrapping it around my finger as well. Okay, so I'm going to come up through the fabric and do the same again. Okay, and at the very end I'm going to tie a knot again, pop my needle through into the loop and pull on the thread so the knot forms where I want it to. And then I can cut off those scrap bits of thread. And that's how you do a running stitch. You should end up with a dashed line that follows the lines of your initials. Now we're going to do a back stitch around the edge of the tree trunk. So I'm going to move this bit of fabric and reposition it into the embroidery hoop, and it's gone a little bit tighter already this time. Remember, you want to make sure that you've got that drum-like tension. So I'm going to go for a little bit of realism here. I want to make sure that my work is realistic, so I'm going to get some brown thread for my tree trunk. But your tree might be a different colour, it might be an imaginary tree, so you can use any colour that you really like if you want to be imaginative with it. I'm just going to thread my needle again. And tie a knot. This is the other way that I tie a knot. I wrap it around my finger and then I get the needle and just sort of carefully do that. You don't want to poke yourself with the needle. Okay, so don't forget to tie your knot in the end of your thread before you start, and we're going to do a back stitch now, and we're going to follow the back stitch all the way around the edge of our tree trunk. Back stitch is quite similar to a running stitch in that you move forwards for the first stitch and then you leave a gap With back stitch, I'm sure you can guess, it goes backwards every now and again. So when you make your gap, you're going to move back into that gap. So move forwards and move back. So I don't know if anybody's done the hokey cokey at a party, but this is kind of like the hokey cokey stitch. You go forwards and backwards, forwards and backwards to where the last stitch ended. So rather than a dashed line, this should look like a solid line. Forwards, leaving a gap, and backwards to where the last stitch ended. And always remember, at the end of every stitch, you need to tie a knot. Tie that as tight as you can and snip those loose threads off. Now you can see back stitch isn't quite as neat at the back as it is at the front. That's okay, that's just how back stitch is supposed to be. Still try and pull your threads through all the way each time. Don't pull them too tight if you haven't got an embroidery hoop, because it'll make your fabric crease up. But one little trick that you can do as you're working is you can just keep flattening out your fabric if it is getting a bit creased. So now we're going to fill this area with a satin stitch. A satin stitch can use quite a lot of thread, but I think for safety and for neatness I would always suggest using no more than 1 arm's length of thread. This is my thread that I'm using. If I need any more, which I probably will, I'll just cut a little bit more off. So if you run out of thread with any type of stitch, you can tie a knot and then get some more thread and start where you left off. It's never a problem. Okay, so to do a satin stitch, I'm going to start from the base. You could start at the top if you wanted, but I'm going to start at the bottom. See if you can see what I'm doing. And then you can move across like that. And on the same side that you've just gone down on, you're going to come up and you're going to go across like that. And I've just come down on this side, so I'm going to come up on this side. Okay, make those stitches really close together. You don't really want to see any bits of white in between those stitches. Okay, so I've come down on the side, so I'm going to come up on this side again. As you can see, I'm zigzagging my way up here. The effect of this is that at the back you can't see any lines going across. If you were doing it going around and around and around, you would end up with lines going across and you'd end up being less economical with your thread. You'd use more thread than you would need to. Okay, so at the back you should find that there are no stitches going across, but all the stitches are at the front. So I'm going to tie a little knot again. So now you should have your running stitch, your back stitch and your satin stitch. The next step that we're going to learn is applique. So I'm going to take this off And I'm going to reposition it again so that we can add a little tree top to our design. So I'll put that to one side. So for this, you're going to need your felt and you're going to need a pencil, okay? And I'm going to keep this to the side so you can kind of see the size that we're working at. You can see the scale. Okay. So for the top of the tree, I only want it to be about this big. So the top of your tree can be any shape you like. If you want to make a Christmas tree shape, you can use little triangles and you can create one like that. If you want to have a perfectly circular tree top, then you can. I'm going to draw a little cloud shape because I like little fluffy trees. But the design of this is entirely up to you. Okay, so I'm going to draw this really carefully using my pencil. One thing with felt is it's impossible to rub out mistakes off it. So if you do make a mistake, then you can flip it over and use the other side. You might notice that on my felt shape here, I've drawn in the bottom corner, and the reason I've done that is because then I can use all of this bit of felt for other things. If I was to draw in the centre of the fabric, then I have less fabric to work with eventually, and I might want to make a nice big tree shape one day. Okay, so I'm going to carefully cut that out. Take your time when you're cutting it. You want to get nice curved lines and not pointy edges. So there you can see we've got the little tree top. Can you see that? There. Okay, so now I'm going to place that where I would like it to go. I think I can see the pencil lines a little bit, so I'm just going to flip it over. And this is another optional piece of equipment, a pin. So I'm going to use a pin to hold this in place while I sew. If you're going to use a pin properly, you need to make sure that you put it down into the fabric and then back up again. And I'm just going to sew around the edge of this as closely as possible. So I'm not going to go and do a stitch here, 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 done. I'm going to follow these edges as carefully as I can, and it's up to you if you want to use a running stitch or a back stitch for this. Okay, so I'm going to start here. I'm going to follow these edges as carefully as I possibly can. Okay, so now I'm going to flip this over, tie a knot, and there we go. Got your thread, and that's the effect that we're looking for. A nice running or back stitch that follows the edges of your tree top very, very closely. Okay, so I'm going to take that pin out now, and I'm going to put it somewhere safe, preferably in a pin cushion, not just on the table because it might roll off the table and go missing. So last but not least, we're going to add some lovely flowers or apples or oranges, fruits of any kind, to the top of your tree trunk. So we're going to learn how to do French knots. French knots are beautiful stitches, but they can be quite fiddly, so practice makes perfect with these. If you don't get it right the first few times, just keep with it and eventually it will become natural to you. But if you follow these steps exactly, then you will get them right every single time. So I have threaded my needle, I have put a knot at the end of my thread, and I am going to put my French knot, my first French knot here, I think. So I'm going to come up through the fabric. I'm going to hold on to my thread very close to the fabric here, and I'm going to put my needle onto the thread and I'm going to wrap it around away from me 1, 2, 3 times, and then I'm going to bring my thread very close to the fabric, and I'm going to put my needle back down through the fabric like that, and I'm going to pull it, and it should form a nice French knot. I'll do it again. Bring your thread up through the fabric, hold on to your thread close to the fabric, put your needle onto the thread, wrap it around 1, 2, 3 times, bring your thread close to the fabric, and needle back down. I'll do it again. Bring your thread up through the fabric, hold on to your thread close to the fabric. Holding on to it all the way up here and wrapping it round doesn't really work. You've got to hold on to it close. Put your needle onto the thread, wrap it round 1, 2, 3 times. You can wrap it round 4 times if you like. You'll just end up with a bigger French knot. Bring it close to the fabric and back down. And I'm just going to do a couple more of those. Okay, so when I've finished those, you can see it looks a bit messy at the back here. It's a bit crisscross, but we don't mind that. We can tie a knot, and I've forgotten how to tie normal knots. Let's try and do a French knot on the back there. There you go, just the same way that you did before with your other stitches, and you can cut it. So then you should end up with a lovely little embroidered tree like that. And if you wanted to, you could add other features like birds in the sky, a sun, some clouds, maybe some little flowers either side of your tree. You could decorate your letters however you like if you want to take this a bit further. But I'm happy with just that for today. Well done everyone. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that it was useful to you. If it was, please give it a like and comment below. And if you'd like to see more of this, then subscribe to my channel. See you next time.